James Bennett, a humble and kind-hearted 78-year-old, has lived a simple life despite secretly being a millionaire. For years, he's valued love and integrity far more than money, dedicating his days to his family, especially his beloved grandson, Charlie. But when Charlie, a vibrant 7-year-old with a passion for Ferraris, is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, James knows he must do whatever it takes to fulfill Charlie's one last wish, to ride in the car of his dreams. This heartwarming tale follows James's journey as he confronts judgment, generosity, and second chances to bring joy to his grandson's life. It's a story about love, resilience, and the true meaning of wealth, found not in material possessions, but in the moments that matter most. As James faces unexpected challenges, he finds allies in surprising places, reminding us all that kindness and compassion can come from even the most unexpected sources. Join James, Charlie, and those whose lives they touch, in this moving story about the power of dreams, the strength of family, and the legacy of love that endures far beyond this life. James Bennett was a man who defied expectations. At 78 years old, he had accumulated an impressive fortune throughout his life, but few knew about it. To those who knew him superficially, he was just another ordinary elderly man, always wearing the same worn-out shirts, simple fabric pants, and shoes that had long lost their shine. James didn't care about appearances. He believed that a person's true worth lay in their actions, not in their possessions. Living in a modest house in the suburbs, James led an almost monastic routine. His days began early with a walk through the neighborhood, where he greeted old friends and acquaintances with a serene smile. He spent most of his time on simple activities, tending to his garden, reading his favorite books, and visiting his daughter, Emma, and his grandson, Charlie. Emma had faced many challenges in life, including a difficult divorce. For James, money was never a source of happiness. He used it sparingly, maintaining a lifestyle that many would consider austere. His best-kept secret was that many years ago, he had won a large sum of money in the lottery. But instead of flaunting his wealth, James decided to live simply, investing most of his money and saving it for times of real need. And that moment arrived during one of his visits to the hospital where Charlie was being treated. The boy, only 7 years old, always had a special sparkle in his eyes when he talked about cars. In one of those conversations, he revealed to his grandfather his biggest dream, to ride in a Ferrari. Charlie had a passion for exotic cars, which for him represented speed, adventure, and, above all, freedom. Seeing the life of his grandson still full of dreams and aspirations, James made a decision that would change everything. He was going to buy a Ferrari for Charlie. Nothing mattered more than fulfilling his grandson's wish, a simple yet grand desire for a boy like Charlie. It was a Saturday morning when James, determined, put on his best shirt, which, though the newest, still showed signs of wear, and left home with a clear purpose. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and the idea of walking into a luxury dealership, a place completely foreign to him, made him feel a bit uneasy. But nothing mattered more than seeing the smile on Charlie's face. On his way to the dealership, James reflected on how money had never been a priority for him. Even so, he was about to use it in the best way he could imagine, bringing joy to his grandson. Upon arriving at the dealership, with its imposing glass and steel facade gleaming in the sunlight, James took a deep breath and crossed the threshold. James Bennett walked into the dealership with calm yet firm steps. The gleam of the luxurious cars displayed under perfect lighting contrasted with the simplicity of his clothes. He approached one of the vehicles, silently admiring the elegant lines of the Ferrari shining before him. It was as if the car had been waiting for him, a work of art that James knew could transform his grandson's dream into reality. Before he could continue his contemplation, James was interrupted by a sharp voice. "Can I help you, sir?" said Mark, the dealership manager, with a forced smile that barely hid the critical assessment of his appearance. Mark, a man in a perfectly tailored suit with a shrewd look, was used to quickly judging the customers who walked through his store's doors. And to him, James looked like anything but a potential buyer. James, unshaken by the coldness in Mark's tone, responded in his calm voice, "Yes, I'm interested in buying a Ferrari." Mark stifled a laugh. The idea seemed absurd to him. "A Ferrari?" he repeated, as if the words were hard to believe. "Are you sure? These cars are, well, let's just say they're a bit more expensive than what you might be used to." James's response was simple and direct. "I know what I want. My grandson wishes to ride in a Ferrari, and I want to buy one for him." For a moment, Mark was silent, a silence that seemed like an eternity to James. The manager looked around, as if expecting someone to confirm that this was all a joke. When he realized James was serious, his expression shifted from disbelief to disdain. "Look, sir, I think you should think twice before joking about something like this. Our Ferraris aren't for everyone. Maybe you should look elsewhere, for something more appropriate," Mark said, his words dripping with sarcasm. James, feeling the rising humiliation, tried to argue, "I'm not joking, young man. I can afford this car, and I'm ready to close the deal right now." But James's words fell on deaf ears. Mark, already impatient and clearly uncomfortable with the elderly man's presence, stepped forward and, with a brusque gesture, pointed to the exit. "I think I've heard enough. You'd better leave before I have to call security. I don't want to create a scene here." Those words hit James like a blow. The elderly man, who rarely let small things bother him, felt a mix of shame and sadness. He wasn't used to being treated like that, especially when all he wanted was to fulfill his grandson's wish. Shaken, James turned and began walking toward the exit, his hands trembling slightly as he held his old wallet in his pocket. To him, that encounter had not only derailed his plans but also hurt his dignity. Just as he was about to cross the glass doors of the dealership, he heard a young, friendly voice call out, "Sir, please wait." James slowly turned and saw a young man approaching. It was David, one of the dealership's salesmen. Unlike Mark, David had a sincere and welcoming look, which immediately brought some relief to James's heart. "I apologize for my colleague's attitude," David said with a regretful expression. "He shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Please, come back. I'd be honored to show you the cars." James hesitated. The bitterness of Mark's words still echoed in his mind, but something in David's voice made him reconsider. There was an honesty and kindness that he hadn't expected to find in that place. "I don't know," James began, still undecided. "I understand, sir," David quickly replied. "But if you really want to make your grandson's dream come true, let me help. Let's look at these cars together, without any rush. I promise the experience will be different." While David spoke, Mark, who had been watching the scene impatiently, received an urgent call. Something that seemed like an external problem demanded his immediate attention. Still grumpy, Mark hurried out of the dealership, leaving James and David alone. James looked at David and saw in the young man's eyes a genuine desire to help. With a sigh, he nodded. Perhaps there was still hope that Charlie's dream could become a reality after all. David smiled broadly, extending his hand to James. "Let's go, sir. I'm sure we'll find the perfect Ferrari for your grandson." James followed David through the luxurious showroom. The Ferraris, with their vibrant colors and impeccable design, were true works of art. David began explaining the technical details of each model, enthusiastically talking about the power, speed, and advanced technologies that made those cars so special. While David spoke, James listened attentively, but his heart was elsewhere. The shine of the cars couldn't erase the constant worry he felt for his grandson. Charlie's desire to ride in a Ferrari weighed on him like a responsibility that needed to be fulfilled at all costs. Noticing the distant look in James's eyes, David paused. "Mr. Bennett, I feel there's more behind your interest in buying this car. I could be wrong, but it seems like this isn't just about acquiring a luxury item." James, who had always been a reserved man, felt he could trust David. Maybe it was the tone of his voice or the way he genuinely seemed to care. Either way, James decided it was time to share the real reason for his visit to the dealership. Taking a deep breath, he began, "David, you're right. I'm not here just to buy a car. I'm here because of my grandson, Charlie." David kept his gaze fixed on James, encouraging him to continue. "Charlie is only 7 years old, but he's already been through a lot in life," James said, his voice trembling with emotion. "He's always been a boy full of energy, with a special love for cars. To him, the Ferrari is the pinnacle of all dreams. He sees these cars as something almost magical, something he's always wanted to experience." James paused, struggling to keep his composure. David could sense the depth of emotions in every word the elderly man said, but there was something more that James had yet to reveal. "Recently, we found out that Charlie is sick," James continued, his voice now softening, burdened with sadness. "He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a degenerative disease that's slowly taking away the things he loves. The doctors say we don't have much time, and all I want is to fulfill this wish before it's too late. I want him to have the chance to ride in a Ferrari, even if it's just once. That's my only goal here." Hearing the name of the disease, David felt a lump form in his throat. Multiple sclerosis was something he had heard of before, but he never imagined a child could suffer from something so devastating. He looked at James and saw not just a customer, but a grandfather desperate to do something special for his grandson, to give him a moment of happiness in the midst of such a harsh reality. "Mr. Bennett," David began, but his voice failed momentarily. He took a deep breath and continued, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what you and your family are going through." James nodded, grateful for the understanding. "I just want to do something for him, David. He deserves a moment of joy, and I can give that to him." David, now with newfound determination, realized that this wasn't just an ordinary sale. It was an opportunity to be part of something bigger, something that truly mattered. He knew he had to act. "Mr. Bennett, I'll do everything in my power to help you and Charlie," David said firmly. "I'm going to talk to my mother, Laura, who owns the dealership. She needs to hear your story. I'm sure she'll want to help." James looked at David with surprise and gratitude. "You would do that for us?" "Yes," David replied with conviction. "This isn't just about a purchase. It's something that can make a real difference in Charlie's life, and we're going to make sure he gets that chance." David was deeply moved by James's story and Charlie's wish. It was clear that this wasn't just another customer looking to buy a luxury car. It was a grandfather trying to fulfill his grandson's last dream while he faced a painful battle against a cruel disease. David knew he needed to act quickly and in the right way. Determined, he stepped away from James for a moment to make a call to his mother, Laura, the owner of the dealership. David knew that for something like this, it was essential for Laura to be involved. It wasn't just a business matter, it was something that touched the heart. He dialed the number with slightly trembling hands. As he heard the phone ring, he felt the urgency growing inside him. Laura answered after a few rings. "David, is everything okay?" Laura asked, concerned, as it was unusual for her son to call during working hours unless it was really important. "Mom, I need you to come to the dealership right now." "It's urgent," David said, trying to stay calm but unable to hide the tension in his voice. "David, what's going on? Is everything okay there?" Laura questioned, now more alarmed. "It's nothing wrong with the store, Mom. It's a different situation. There's a gentleman here, James Bennett, and he's looking to buy a Ferrari. But his story, it's something you need to hear in person. Please come as quickly as you can. It's about his grandson, Charlie. He's sick, and this purchase is much more than just a car. On the other end of the line, Laura was silent for a moment, absorbing David's words. She trusted her son's judgment, and if he said it was serious, she knew she needed to get there immediately. "I'm on my way," Laura said firmly. "Don't let Mr. Bennett leave. I'll be there as soon as possible." With the call ended, David felt immediate relief. He knew his mother would have the sensitivity and experience needed to handle such a delicate situation. Now, he just had to ensure that James felt comfortable while they waited. David returned to where James was sitting, still with a worried expression on his face. The elderly man had placed his hands in his lap and was looking at the floor, lost in thoughts about Charlie. He wanted so much to fulfill that dream, but Mark's behavior and the complexity of his situation made him uncertain. "Mr. Bennett, my mother is on her way," David said with an encouraging smile. "She really wants to meet you and hear your story." James looked up, surprised at how quickly David had acted. "She's really coming? I don't want to be a burden." "Not at all," David replied, sitting next to James. "She cares deeply about what we do here, and I'm sure she'll want to help in the best way possible." James nodded, feeling a bit of comfort in those words. David, sensing that the elderly man needed something to ease the tension, began talking about the cars in the dealership, trying to distract James while they waited. "Mr. Bennett, did you know this Ferrari here is one of the fastest we have? It goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, David said, pointing to one of the nearby models. "I imagine Charlie would love that." James smiled slightly. He would be fascinated, for sure. Charlie has always been passionate about cars. Since he was little, he collected miniature models and knew the names of all the cars. David continued talking with James, asking questions about Charlie, trying to learn more about the boy who, even without meeting, had already touched his heart. Every time James talked about his grandson, his eyes sparkled with a mix of pride and sadness. It was clear how much he loved the boy and how much he cared about giving him something special. Time seemed to pass faster as the two conversed. David made sure to keep James engaged, showing him more Ferrari models, talking about the brand's history, and even sharing some funny stories about customers he had served. James, in turn, began to feel more at ease, sensing that there was someone who truly cared about him and Charlie. Finally, after about 30 minutes, the dealership doors opened again, and Laura entered. She was a woman of strong presence, with an air of authority that matched her elegant demeanor. Her eyes scanned the room until they found David and James sitting and talking. David immediately stood up, going to meet his mother. "Mom, this is Mr. James Bennett," he said, gesturing toward the elderly man. Laura approached, extending her hand to James with a warm smile. "Mr. Bennett, it's a pleasure to meet you. David told me about your visit, and I'm here to help with whatever you need." James slowly stood up, shaking Laura's hand with a look of gratitude. "Thank you so much for coming. I didn't know who else to turn to, but your son has been very kind to me." "David has always had a big heart," Laura said, glancing affectionately at her son. "Now, please, tell me more about Charlie and what we can do to help him." James took a deep breath before beginning to recount, once again, Charlie's wish, his passion for cars, and the harsh reality they were facing with the illness. Laura listened intently, her eyes reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Laura listened carefully as James repeated Charlie's story, each word filled with emotion and deep love for his grandson. David remained by her side, watching his mother's expression soften as the narrative progressed. James spoke about how Charlie, even at such a young age, had an almost magical fascination with cars, especially Ferraris, which he saw as the pinnacle of automotive perfection. He described the sparkle in the boy's eyes whenever he saw a Ferrari, the way he talked about the cars as if they were living creatures, full of power and beauty. "All he wants," James said with a choked voice, "is to have the chance to ride in a Ferrari, even if it's just once. And I would do anything to make that wish come true." Laura felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly wiped away with her fingertips. She was moved by the simplicity and depth of James's desire, a wish that transcended any commercial transaction. This situation wasn't about selling a luxury car. It was about providing a moment of joy to a child facing a difficult battle. "Mr. Bennet," Laura began, her voice soft but firm, "your story has touched my heart. I can't imagine the pain your family is going through, but I can understand how much this moment would mean to Charlie. That's why I've made a decision." James looked at her, apprehensive, while David also waited anxiously to hear what his mother would say. "I want to offer you the Ferrari at no cost," Laura said with a sincere smile. "Consider it a gift from us to Charlie. He deserves to live this experience, and we want to be part of this special moment." James blinked, surprised and somewhat confused. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. It was more than he could have ever expected, a gesture of kindness so great that it left him speechless. David, standing beside him, smiled broadly, proud of his mother's decision. "Ms. Laura, I don't know what to say," James stammered, trying to process the generous offer. "You don't need to say anything, Mr. Bennet," Laura replied kindly. "This is our way of contributing to making Charlie's dream come true. I couldn't charge for something like this, knowing what it means to you and to him." James was silent for a few moments, his eyes filling with tears, but soon a determined expression took over his face. He knew that Laura was being incredibly generous, but he also knew that he had the means to pay for the car and wanted to do so. Not out of pride, but because he had always believed that people should be fair, even in moments like this. "Ms. Laura," he began, his voice now steadier, "I deeply appreciate your generosity. This truly means the world to me and to Charlie. But I need to be honest with you. I am not a poor man. Many years ago, I won a fortune in the lottery, but I chose to live simply because I've always believed that money doesn't define who we are." Laura and David exchanged surprised glances. The revelation caught them both off guard. The modestly dressed man, who seemed to have little, actually had a hidden fortune. But what was most impressive wasn't the money itself, but the fact that James had never let his wealth change his essence. "I understand what you want to do, and I'm immensely grateful for it," James continued. "But I insist on paying for the Ferrari. I have the means, and I want this transaction to be fair. If you'll allow it, I want to pay the fair price for the car. This doesn't change the value of your gesture, but it's important to me." Laura was momentarily speechless. James's honesty and integrity were inspiring. He wasn't just buying a car, he was keeping his dignity and values intact, even in such an emotional situation. "If that's what you wish, Mr. Bennet, then we'll accept," Laura finally said with an understanding smile. "But know that your gesture is just as valuable to us. This won't be just another car sold. It will be a reminder of what really matters in life." David, still processing everything that had happened in the past few minutes, approached James and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Bennet, you're an admirable man. Charlie is very lucky to have a grandfather like you." James simply nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. He knew he had made the right choice by coming to that dealership, and even more so by insisting on doing things the right way. The sale of the Ferrari was no longer just a purchase. It had become a symbol of everything he believed in and the love he felt for his grandson. As they finalized the details, Laura and David made sure everything was perfect. They knew that this moment would be unforgettable, not just for James and Charlie, but for themselves as well. It was a reminder that sometimes business transcends the material and touches the true meaning of humanity. With all the details of the Ferrari sale nearly complete, Laura and David were focused on the necessary paperwork. James watched the two silently, still surprised by the generosity and understanding he had found there. He knew he was about to make a great dream come true for his grandson, and that gave him a sense of peace and satisfaction. "I'll get a few more documents to finalize the sale," Laura said, getting up and leaving the room to fetch the papers from her office. "I'll be right back." While Laura was gone, the dealership door opened again. Mark, the manager, entered with quick steps, his face showing frustration. He had left to deal with an urgent personal issue and was now back, still irritated by the setback he had faced. As he crossed the showroom, Mark saw James out of the corner of his eye, sitting next to David, but didn't notice Laura's presence. He frowned upon seeing the elderly man still there, and a wave of irritation took over him. How was that shabby old man still in the store? Without thinking twice, Mark approached James, completely ignoring David, and let out a sarcastic laugh. "You're still here, old man?" Mark sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "I thought I made it clear that this isn't the place for someone like you. What do you think you're doing? Trying to buy a Ferrari? Don't be ridiculous." James, who was sitting calmly, was caught off guard by Mark's sudden aggressiveness. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, David tried to intervene. However, before he could act, Laura returned to the room with the documents in hand, hearing the last of Mark's words. Laura stopped for a moment, her expression shifting to a mixture of disbelief and anger. She immediately realized what was happening and prepared to act. Mark, still unaware that Laura had returned, continued to mock James, raising his voice even more. "This place isn't for people like you," Mark continued, his arrogance only growing. "You should look for something more in your league." "Mark!" Laura's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. Mark froze at the sound of his name, instantly recognizing his boss's voice. He turned slowly, realizing with horror that Laura had been there the whole time. "Miss Laura, Mark began, desperately trying to find an excuse, but the words failed him as he saw the icy look on her face. "I heard everything," Laura said, cutting off any attempt at an explanation. "And I'm completely disgusted by your behavior. How dare you speak to a customer like that? How dare you mock someone, especially after everything he shared with us?" Mark turned pale. He tried to stammer an explanation, but Laura wasn't interested in hearing excuses. "That kind of attitude is unacceptable," she continued, each word carrying a controlled fury. "I've always valued treating our customers with respect and dignity, regardless of how they dress or appear. You, Mark, have failed miserably to demonstrate those values." David watched the scene in silence, knowing that his mother was about to make a drastic decision. He felt a mix of satisfaction at seeing Mark held accountable and slight discomfort at the intensity of the situation. Laura took a step closer to Mark, not breaking eye contact. "Several customers have already complained about you to me, and I've tried giving you chances to improve. But this is the last straw. You're fired, Mark. Now, get out of my store." Mark was left speechless, trying to process what he had just heard. The humiliation and shock were clear on his face, but he knew there was nothing he could say to change Laura's decision. With his face burning with shame, he turned and left the dealership, not even looking back. Silence filled the room after Mark's departure. Laura took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She then turned to James, her expression softening once again. "Mr. Bennett, I apologize for Mark's behavior. He acted completely inappropriately, and I hope you know that this doesn't reflect the values my family and I stand for." James, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "I appreciate it, Ms. Laura. You did what you thought was right, and I respect that. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to make a request." Laura looked at him, curious. "Of course, Mr. Bennet. What do you wish?" "I believe in second chances," James said in a gentle tone. "Your son, David, gave me a second chance today by calling me back to the store and listening to my story. I'd like you to consider giving Mark the same opportunity. Maybe he needs to learn kindness, but I believe he can change." David looked at James with admiration, while Laura reflected on the request. She knew that James was being generous, even after being treated so poorly, and that attitude made him even more worthy of respect. "If that's what you wish, I can reconsider," Laura said after a moment of silence. "But Mark will have to prove that he's capable of changing." James nodded, satisfied with the response. "Sometimes, all we need is someone to show us the right way." With the tension finally lifted, Laura and David returned to the table to complete the sale. Now, with all the papers signed and the situation resolved, they were ready to deliver the Ferrari to James, ensuring that Charlie's dream would come true. Right after the sale was finalized, the atmosphere in the dealership was one of urgency and purpose. Laura, David, and James knew there was no time to waste. With the contract signed and the Ferrari ready to go, they decided to act immediately. It was already late in the day, and the sun was beginning to dip in the sky, casting a golden light over the city. James, with the Ferrari keys in hand, felt the weight of responsibility and emotion. He looked at Laura and David, who accompanied him to the dealership's exit, ready to follow him to the hospital where Charlie was being treated. They all knew that this moment couldn't wait. The Ferrari, gleaming and imposing, was parked in front of the dealership, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The engine was already running, its low but powerful rumble ready to carry James to meet his grandson. "We're going now," James said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "Charlie deserves this, and we can't waste any more time." David nodded, feeling the urgency in James's words. "We'll be right behind you, Mr. Bennet," he replied. Laura and David got into a second car, ready to follow the Ferrari to the hospital. As James drove the Ferrari through the city streets, the car glided through traffic with a silent elegance, but its presence didn't go unnoticed. The drive to the hospital, though short, seemed like a journey full of meaning for James. He felt his heart racing, anxious to see Charlie's reaction when he saw the car. When they arrived at the hospital, the late afternoon sun painted the sky with warm colors, creating the perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. James parked the Ferrari right in front of the main entrance, his heart beating fast with anticipation. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was as heavy as always, filled with the gravity of the circumstances, but that afternoon something was about to change. James, accompanied by Laura and David, walked through the hospital corridors with firm steps, each of them carrying the expectation of an unforgettable encounter. When they reached Charlie's room, they found Emma sitting beside her son's bed, holding his small hand. She looked up when she saw her father enter, followed by Laura and David. Emma's face lit up with surprise and emotion as she realized something special was happening. "Dad, what's going on?" Emma asked, standing up to hug him. James returned the hug lovingly, feeling the weight of his daughter's worries. "Emma, I managed to make Charlie's wish come true," he said softly, his eyes filled with tears held back. "I brought a Ferrari for him. He's going to get the ride he always dreamed of." Emma put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back the tears that were already forming. She knew how much that wish meant to Charlie and what it represented for her father. "You did it, Dad." You really brought a Ferrari? James nodded, emotional. Yes, dear. It's outside, waiting for him. Charlie, who was lying in bed, heard the conversation and, despite his weakness, his eyes widened with surprise and joy. Grandpa, a Ferrari? A real one? He asked, his voice weak but full of expectation. James approached the bed and held Charlie's small hand. Yes, my dear. A real Ferrari, just for you. We're going for a ride. How about that? With the help of a nurse, Charlie was carefully prepared to leave the room. Emma and James helped the boy sit in a wheelchair, while Laura and David waited outside, ready to see the boy's reaction. When Charlie was brought outside and saw the red Ferrari parked in front, his expression transformed. The fatigue seemed to disappear, replaced by pure and innocent excitement. His eyes sparkled like never before, and a wide smile spread across his face. Grandpa, it's the most beautiful Ferrari I've ever seen, Charlie exclaimed, his voice full of admiration. James, with tears in his eyes, smiled at his grandson. And it's all yours today, Charlie. Let's go for a ride. Carefully, David and Laura helped James place Charlie in the passenger seat of the Ferrari. The boy, despite his weakness, was completely absorbed in the experience. He touched the steering wheel, ran his hands over the dashboard, and closed his eyes for a moment, as if engraving every detail in his memory. James got into the car, fastened his seatbelt, and looked at Charlie beside him. Ready, champ? Let's go. Charlie nodded, still smiling. James started the engine, and the Ferrari's roar echoed, making Charlie's eyes shine even more. They drove off slowly, with James navigating the streets while Charlie enjoyed every second, marveling at the sensation of speed, the sound of the engine, and the view of the passing cars and landscapes. The ride was short, but for Charlie, it felt like it lasted an eternity. Every turn, every acceleration was a dream coming true, a moment of pure happiness in the midst of everything happening in his life. When they returned to the hospital, James parked the Ferrari at the entrance, and Charlie turned to him, his eyes still sparkling with emotion. "Thank you, Grandpa. This was the best day of my life," he said, his voice now soft but filled with gratitude. James held Charlie's hand and smiled, tears silently streaming down his face. "I would do anything for you, Charlie. Seeing you happy is all that matters." As they helped Charlie back into the hospital, everyone around could feel that the moment had been magical. Emma hugged her father tightly, silently thanking him for everything he had done for her son. Laura and David, watching closely, were also deeply moved. They knew they had been part of something very special, something that transcended any commercial transaction. That afternoon, a wish had been fulfilled, and an unforgettable moment had been created. The weeks following Charlie's Ferrari ride were marked by a mixture of joy and sadness for the Bennett family. The sparkle in Charlie's eyes during that brief moment of happiness still resonated in everyone's memory. But the reality of the illness was relentless, and as the doctors had predicted, Charlie passed away shortly afterward. Grief enveloped James, Emma, and all who had known and loved Charlie. However, even amidst the pain, there was a deep sense of peace in knowing that Charlie's wish had been fulfilled. For James, that ride wasn't just a farewell. It was a gift that he would always carry in his heart. Laura and David, equally affected by the experience, felt that the moment had changed something deep within them. Charlie's story and James's unwavering love had left an indelible mark on their lives. They couldn't let this memory fade away. They needed to find a way to keep Charlie's spirit alive, not just for the Bennett family, but for everyone who crossed the dealership's path. That's when Laura had an idea that she quickly shared with David. "We need to do more than just remember Charlie," she said one day as they walked through the dealership. "We need his story to inspire others. Let's rename the dealership in his honor." David, touched by the idea, immediately agreed. "That would be wonderful, Mom. Charlie's story can continue to live here, and it can serve as a reminder to all of us of the true value of our actions." Determined, Laura and David began planning the rebranding. They wanted the dealership's new identity to reflect the values that Charlie had inspired in them: compassion, generosity, and the fulfillment of dreams. Meanwhile, Mark, who had been fired after the confrontation with Laura, went through a remarkable personal transformation. The shock of nearly losing everything and James's generosity in asking for a second chance for him made Mark deeply reconsider his behavior. He began attending personal development courses, seeking ways to improve his attitude and become more empathetic toward others. Mark approached Laura some time later, not to ask for his job back, but to express his gratitude. "Ms. Laura," he said, his voice filled with humility, "I know I made many mistakes, and I deserve to be fired. But Mr. Bennett's kindness touched me deeply. I just wanted to thank you for giving me a second chance to become a better person." Laura, seeing the sincerity in Mark's eyes, felt that he had indeed changed. "Mark, I'm glad you took this opportunity. It's rare to find people who recognize their mistakes and strive to change. Keep it up, and maybe one day we can work together again." As the days passed, the dealership's rebranding was finally complete. On the day of the grand reveal, Laura invited James, Emma, and several friends and clients to the ceremony. Everyone knew that this wasn't just a commercial event, but a celebration of life and Charlie's legacy. James arrived early, accompanied by Emma. Both were visibly moved when they saw the new dealership facade, which now proudly displayed the name Charlie Bennett Motors. Below the name, in smaller letters, were the words, "Where dreams come true." During the ceremony, Laura gave a brief speech. "Today, we are here not only to unveil a new name, but to celebrate the life of a boy who showed us the true meaning of generosity and love. Charlie's memory will continue to live on here, inspiring all of us to be better and to fulfill the dreams of those around us." James, deeply moved, took the stage to say a few words. Charlie was always full of life, and his biggest dream was to ride in a Ferrari. "Seeing that dream come true was the greatest joy of my life. But what happened afterward, with the support of everyone here, showed me that his spirit is still alive. This dealership now carries his name, and with it, his memory will be a source of inspiration for everyone who passes through these doors." The plaque was finally revealed, and everyone in attendance applauded in unison. The words "Where dreams come true" gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the essence of what the place had become. Mark, who was among the crowd, smiled as he saw the new plaque. He knew that, in some way, the experience had changed his life forever. He approached James after the ceremony, thanking him once again for the chance he had been given, and promised to continue working on himself. From that day on, Charlie Bennett Motors became more than just a place of business. It became a symbol of hope, the fulfillment of dreams, and second chances. Everyone who entered there knew they were in a special place, where the memory of a boy who loved exotic cars continued to inspire kindness, compassion, and the belief that, no matter how hard things get, there's always room to make dreams come true. And so, Charlie Bennett's memory remained alive, not only in the hearts of his family but in everyone who heard his story. In life, it's the small acts of kindness and the dreams we help others achieve that truly leave a lasting legacy. Just like James, who went to extraordinary lengths to bring joy to his grandson, we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small. If this story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Take a moment to reflect on the people around you. What simple act of kindness could bring light to their day? Share this story, spread compassion, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give is simply showing that you care. Let's make the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time.